Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. And by the end of this, you'll know exactly why. Starting from fact number 30, Uganda is landlocked. No ocean, no coastline, not a single beach touching the sea, and yet almost a fifth of the entire country is water. Lakes, rivers, swamps, everywhere. So you've got a nation with no sea access that's somehow drowning in fresh water. They call it the Pearl of Africa. And once you see how much of it shimmers, you get why. Fact 29. Let's talk about the big one, Lake Victoria. It's the largest lake in Africa and the second largest freshwater lake on the entire planet, covering nearly 69,000 square kilometers across Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Over 40 million people depend on it. But here's the part nobody mentions. The water in Lake Victoria takes about 23 years to fully cycle through. Rain falls in, evaporation pulls it out, and it just sits there. This massive inland sea, barely moving. Fact 28. In the 1950s, someone introduced Nile perch fish into Lake Victoria. The idea seemed reasonable, a big, commercially valuable fish for a big lake. What followed was an ecological catastrophe. The Nile perch had no natural predators, so it just ate and ate. Over 200 species of cichlid fish found nowhere else on Earth were driven to extinction, making it one of the worst freshwater biological invasions in recorded history. Fact 27. This one is insane. Uganda's Murchison Falls is often called the most powerful waterfall on Earth. The whole Nile River gets squeezed through a gap in the rock just 7 meters wide, about the length of a school bus. Around 300 tons of water blast through every second, then crash 43 meters into a pool the locals call the Devil's Cauldron. You can hear the roar for kilometers. Fact 26. Uganda has one of the lowest carbon footprints on the planet, roughly 0.1 tons of CO2 per person each year. Uganda sits far below the global average of around 4.6 tons. Unlike many developing nations that rely heavily on coal or diesel generators for grid power, Uganda boasts an exceptionally green electricity sector. Roughly 90% of Uganda's grid electricity is generated from renewable hydropower. Fact 25. Uganda sits right on the equator. The line passes through a place called Kayabwe, 72 kilometers south of the capital. Here's the fun part. Guides pour water into a bowl with a leaf in it. Step north, the water spins one way. Step south, it spins the other way. Right on the line, it just goes straight down. The science says this trick shouldn't work, but it is definitely so cool to watch. Fact 24. Even though Uganda sits on the equator, it's not super hot. Most of the country is high up, around 900 to 1,500 meters above the sea. That height keeps things cool. The weather stays mild, the soil stays rich, and long ago, Winston Churchill called the whole place end to end one beautiful garden. A garden on the equator, kept cool by how high it sits. Fact 23. Okay, here's where it gets weird in the best way. Uganda has glaciers. Real ones. The Rwenzori Mountains in the west, the legendary Mountains of the Moon, hold permanent ice and snow, and they're only about 40 kilometers north of the equator. The peaks freeze at minus 15 degrees, while the jungle at the base is warm and humid. It's one of the few places in Africa with equatorial glaciers, and the views up there are unreal. Fact 22. And inside those same mountains is Margarita Peak, sitting at 5,109 meters, shared by both Uganda and the DR Congo. That makes it the third highest point in all of Africa, behind only Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya. But unlike Kilimanjaro, which you can basically walk up, summiting Margarita is proper mountaineering. Crampons, ice axes, ropes across glaciers, on the equator, in Africa. People don't believe me when I say it. Fact 21. I have to be real with you. This one hurts. Uganda's glaciers are dying. Since 1906, the Rwenzori has lost more than 80% of its ice. Old photos from 100 years ago show the ice sitting hundreds of feet higher than it does today. And scientists say the rest could be gone in just 10 to 15 years. So if you ever want to see glaciers on the equator, the clock is ticking. Fact 20. Uganda is home to about half of all the mountain gorillas left on Earth. There are just over 1,000 of them left in the wild, and a huge number live in one forest, Bwindi Impenetrable National Park. The forest is so dense, so tangled with vines, that you have to hack your way through it to find them. It's one of the only places on Earth you can sit a few meters from a wild silverback. Fact 19. Uganda is a paradise for birds, and the numbers prove it. Over 1,000 bird species live here. That's nearly half of all the birds in Africa, packed into a country smaller than the state of Oregon. The star is the shoebill stork, a huge, prehistoric-looking bird with a bill like a giant clog, standing dead still in the swamps. It looks like a dinosaur that forgot to go extinct. Fact 18. Here's a record nobody talks about. Lake Victoria is one of the most dangerous bodies of water in the world. It has one of the highest drowning rates on Earth, and thousands of fishermen and travelers die on it every year. Storms blow up out of nowhere. The boats are small and often overloaded, and most people on the water can't swim. This calm, beautiful lake has a brutal side most tourists never hear about. Fact 17. Now this is one of my favorite geological facts anywhere. Lake Victoria isn't an old natural basin like you'd expect. It was created when the land literally tilted. About 100,000 years ago, the African continent started ripping apart, and the western edge bulged upward. That uplift reversed the direction of rivers that used to flow west. The water backed up, flooded a giant shallow depression, and boom, the largest lake in Africa was born. Fact 16. Uganda's only bird species found nowhere else on Earth is the fox's weaver. For years, it was so rare that many birdwatchers almost considered it a myth. After a few sightings in the 1990s, it nearly disappeared from official records, raising fears that habitat loss was pushing it toward extinction. Thankfully, later field surveys and citizen science projects rediscovered the bird, finding active breeding colonies hidden in remote wetlands and protected areas. Sometimes the best rediscoveries happen when people refuse to stop looking. Fact 15. Western Uganda is dotted with over 300 volcanic crater lakes, perfectly round bowls of water left behind by old volcanic vents. Some are deep emerald green. Some are a rich, almost unnatural blue. They sit in the hills like mirrors someone forgot to pick up. The local Bunyoro and Toro people have lived around them for centuries and built whole beliefs around what they thought lived at the bottom. Fact 14. In southwestern Uganda, there's a lake called Bunyonyi, and it's stunning. 29 islands scattered across mirror calm water, ringed by steep terraced hills people call the Switzerland of Africa. Locals swear it's the second deepest lake in Africa, plunging 900 meters down. The science says it's closer to 40 meters, so take that with a pinch of salt. But true or not, the legend has hung over this lake for generations. And standing on its shore, you'd believe anything. Fact 13. Lake Bunyonyi is one of the few lakes in Africa that's truly safe to swim in. No crocodiles, no bilharzia. It sits high up in the Kigezi Highlands, almost 2,000 meters above sea level. That altitude keeps the water cool, around 25 degrees Celsius at the surface, and colder the deeper you go. Crocodiles are cold-blooded and need warm tropical water to survive, so Bunyonyi's chilly mountain water naturally keeps them out. Fact 12. Uganda is home to the Ankoli long-horned cow, which has some of the biggest horns of any cattle on Earth, stretching over 2 meters from tip to tip. But they're not just for show. The horns are packed with blood vessels that release heat and keep the animal cool in the equatorial sun. These cattle have been around for thousands of years and even show up in ancient Egyptian art. Watching a herd cross the grassland is like seeing a slow-moving forest of bone. Fact 11. You've probably heard of the Zika virus, the one that caused a global panic back in 2015. Well, it's named after a forest right here in Uganda. Back in 1947, scientists in the tiny Zika forest near Entebbe were studying caged monkeys when one suddenly caught a strange fever. The virus they found inside it took the forest's name. And Zika actually means overgrown in the local Luganda language. For decades, it stayed mild and forgotten until it exploded across the world. A global health emergency named after a quiet little patch of trees by Lake Victoria. Fact 10. Uganda is young. And I don't mean it gained independence recently. I mean the people. One of the youngest populations on Earth. The median age is around 17 years old. If you lined up every single Ugandan from youngest to oldest, the person standing dead in the middle would be a teenager. Roughly 3/4 of the entire country is under 35. Fact 9. There's a channel in Queen Elizabeth National Park called the Kazinga Channel, a natural waterway about 32 kilometers long linking two lakes. And it holds one of the largest concentrations of hippos found anywhere in the world. Hundreds and hundreds of them crammed into this one stretch of water alongside enormous Nile crocodiles. Take a boat cruise down it and you're basically floating through a wildlife traffic jam. Fact 8. Remember those mountains of the moon? They were named over 1,800 years ago. The ancient Greek geographer Ptolemy wrote, back in the 2nd century, about a range of snow-capped mountains deep in the African interior whose melting snow fed the Nile. For centuries, people thought it was a myth, a fairy tale. Turns out, he was describing the Ruwenzori. He was right. He just had the directions to a snowy mountain range on the equator before anyone in Europe had ever seen it. Fact 7. Uganda's plant life goes giant in the mountains. Up in the high zones of the Ruwenzori, ordinary plants have evolved into towering, alien-looking versions of themselves. Giant groundsels that stand taller than a person. Giant lobelias covered in silvery leaves standing like sentries across the moorland. It's a real place, but it looks like the set of a science fiction film. Cold, misty, and full of plants that grew up wrong in the best possible way.
Fact 6.
Now, this one may be uncomfortable for some of you. Lake Bunyonyi hides a dark history. One small island, Akampene, means punishment island. Until around the 1940s, unmarried Bakiga girls who became pregnant were abandoned there by their families. With no food or shelter, many starved or drowned trying to escape. The island existed because an unmarried pregnancy could cost a family the cattle they expected as a bride price. Geography made the punishment possible. A remote island in a deep lake. Some poor men watched the island and secretly rescued stranded girls at night, marrying them without paying a bride price. A beautiful lake, but a very heartbreaking past. Fact 5. Now let's lift up the mood. Uganda's wildlife crosses borders like the borders don't exist, because to the animals, they don't. The country sits at this incredible crossroads where the savannas of East Africa meet the rainforests of Central Africa. That's why you get this insane mix in one nation. Lions and elephants on open plains in one region, and chimpanzees and gorillas in dense jungle just a few hours away. Most countries have one ecosystem. Uganda got the whole sampler platter. Fact 4. Speaking of chimps, Uganda has one of the best places on the planet to see them. Kibale Forest is sometimes called the primate capital of the world. 13 different species of primate live there. Chimpanzees, red colobus monkeys, gray-cheeked mangabes, the lot. You walk into the forest, and the canopy above you is genuinely alive with movement and screaming and rustling. It's chaos. Beautiful chaos.
Fact 3.
Uganda still has living traditional kingdoms, Buganda, Bunyoro, Toro, and Busoga among them, each with its own king. While they were completely abolished in 1967 by President Milton Obote, the Ugandan government legally restored them in 1993 under President Yoweri Museveni. Buganda is the largest and most politically influential kingdom in Uganda. Its ruler is called the Kabaka, and the reigning monarch is Kabaka Ronald Muwenda Mutebi II. The country of Uganda actually takes its name from this kingdom.
Fact 2.
Ugandan English, also known as Uglish, is a brilliant example of how language adapts, mixing British English grammar with local Ugandan vocabulary and direct translations. The term boda actually evolved from the phrase border to border. In the 1960s and 70s, motorcycle riders used to ferry people across the no-man's land between the Kenya-Uganda border posts, shouting, "Border, border," to get passengers' attention. Eventually, it was shortened to boda boda and became the country's ultimate mode of transport.
And finally, Fact 1.
For centuries, the source of the Nile was the greatest geographical mystery on Earth. Empires sent men to die for it. Ptolemy guessed at it from rumors. Explorers spent their whole lives chasing a river upstream into a continent nobody had mapped. And the famous answer was here in Uganda. Every year, the floods that fed the pharaohs came roaring down from the mountains of Ethiopia. But when those floods faded, when the dry season came and the river should have shriveled to nothing, the Nile kept flowing. That steady, unstoppable flow, the heartbeat that never stops, starts right here, bubbling out of the largest lake in Africa, near Jinja. The Nile, long called the longest river on Earth, though the Amazon still fights it for the crown. 6,000 kilometers of history, the cradle of pharaohs, and it all begins right here. So that's Uganda. 30 facts barely scratch the pearl of Africa. A country like this can't fit in one video. But here's the thing. Explorers gave their whole lives chasing what was hidden in this country, and even they missed things. The best stories were never in their journals. They're with the people who actually live there.